Okay, good morning. I see a few familiar faces in the room. Let me do a quick sort of check. How many people are new to fundraising? Excellent. Is everyone a nonprofit or a hybrid? Pretty much? Okay. So this is my 22nd year as a professional fundraiser. I've worked in all aspects of nonprofit fundraising. So I don't come from the journalism side. I come from the nonprofit world, and which has been, I think, a nice balance, especially as we were starting. Well, I've been here for 5.5 years, so I wasn't at the beginning, but got here as soon as I could. And for me personally, this is the culmination of everywhere I've worked, whether it's health or human services, education, the environment. We cover all of those in our verticals, and so this is a really fulfilling, wonderful role. But I do think and know that major gifts and fundraising can be feared, or at least lots of worry or even distrust of the process, or feeling that it's mysterious, and it's not. So I'm hoping today that I can dispel any worries or apprehensions about doing fundraising. All right, so let's go. All right, so this is a breakdown of our revenue annually. Evan showed you the all-time actuals, but this is more on a yearly basis. He'll show you the breakdown of our funding streams. And so what we've had from the beginning and we recommitted to during the strategic planning process is this diversity of funding streams. While we recognize that some of our partner organizations are funded differently, perhaps by one entity or one individual philanthropist, what we have felt from the beginning, and we've maintained that almost every year this mix is pretty much true to this breakdown. And we feel like this diversity of funding streams is the healthiest way that we can go forward. As Evan mentioned, we're hoping that this allows us to weather any ups and downs in the market, or I've done fundraising through other national disasters, natural disasters, where sometimes philanthropy will move a different direction, and you try to hedge your bets by having this diverse portfolio. So what I'm going to talk to you about, and then you'll see later April's part for the sponsorships, but essentially it's almost sliced down the middle between individual philanthropy traditional philanthropy and sponsorships. We have a $10 million budget this year, and it's almost perfectly half and half. The little wedge in the middle, the two wedges, membership and earned, are the two sort of exceptions there to our breakdown between development's role and sponsorships roles. But otherwise, that's sort of the mix. Membership had traditionally in many nonprofits is in development, and it was with us at the beginning, but we have since moved the membership team over to the audience team in recognition of seeing membership as sort of the ultimate engagement metric. And so it is actually, you'll hear from Sarah, I believe, later, is that right? Who will talk more about our membership program, but membership is not under fundraising or development, so she'll go into more of that. So we'll move on. Well, I can see that it's changing on there.
Yeah, I'll grab Michael Ray.
Okay. Anyway, well, I've got my own slide, my stuff. Oh, there we go. Delayed reaction. Okay, so Evan also alluded to our donor wall, which is on our site. It updates every morning, and it's driven by Salesforce. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about both those things. So the donor wall originated in our, sincere attempt to be as transparent as possible and to list all of our donors in real time, as Evan alluded to. There's that question about, how can you maintain your editorial integrity and receive gifts? We think we've busted through that misperception, but we do keep this up to date at all times. It's once you figure it out, it's actually really easy. And for us, we've decided that maintaining this high level of transparency is sort of like telling the truth all the time. If you disclose everything, you don't ever have to think, did I disclose that? Did I not? It's all out there. And so every gift, if you scroll down, $1 gifts are noted. It is truly comprehensive. But what it also has turned out to be is a great fundraising tool, because especially when we're talking to Texas donors, we can point to this donor wall and show people who are recognizable names they know that come from all sorts of different geographies, political stripes, everything else, and we're able to point to this and use it as a tool in fundraising when people say, how do I really know that you're nonpartisan, or how do I know this, that, and the other? We point to this and we say, look at this wall. These people would not be supporting us if we didn't, and continue to support us year after year, if they didn't think that we were doing what we say we'll do. So we do use Salesforce, and it's something that we have had for about 5 years now, and it's great now because instead of having a separate database for the fundraising and a separate database for events and a separate database, we I think had 4 databases until we adopted Salesforce. And this was an attempt for all the teams to be able to work in one database together so that we could start collecting more data. I'm going to talk in a minute about sort of the art and the science of fundraising. The science part of being very data-driven starts with having your own great database. And so it's been really successful, and over time we've been able to build more of a profile around donors that benefits the membership program. We're hoping that we can take that even further so that you can start analyzing, these donors have these characteristics. They perhaps subscribe to this many newsletters, they attend this many events every year, they comment, and then you can start analyzing that and thinking, okay, who are the other people in our database who have these same qualities but perhaps haven't given yet? And so that's that data-driven part that is essential for fundraising. All right, so going back to that pie chart. Let's see, okay, it just looks like we're on delay. So the development department, our buckets of revenue are individual major gifts, foundation grants, and our Circle membership program. And so I mentioned a minute ago that membership is no longer under development, kind of with one exception. We have a Circle program that is 3-year commitments from donors to give $1,000, $2,500, or $5,000 annually. And this is a very successful program. Evan mentioned a minute ago that it's, the get out of my office plan. It's actually a little bit more strategic than that, in that what really the Circle program has become is an opportunity sometimes for people to get to know us better if they're a new donor. And so it's a great sort of entry point. I'll get to know you, I'll become a Circle donor, and then very often we move them into major gifts after we've had a chance to cultivate them, to get to know them better, and prove, as Agnes said, we like to over-deliver and then try to go back for more. And so it's also been a place where some major donors, this is also part of fundraising, you gotta roll with whatever you're given. And And so the other part about the Circle program is it's also been a place on the other end of the fundraising spectrum. Some major donors who helped us get started at the beginning and gave sort of extraordinary gifts have been very honest, both foundations and individuals, to say over time, we will probably, reduce the amount that we're giving you. And so the Circle program has been a great place to sort of go to more of a maintenance gift. And then for some people, it's just the perfect amount. I have $2,500 to give you every year. I feel really great about this. The Circle program has a really high renewal rate, so we know that it's been a really successful strategy for us, and I'll come back to it in a second. Major gifts are gifts of $5,000 or more annually. We have right now probably around 45 major donors. And we, again, have a pretty high renewal rate on those annually. And I'll come back to more about the major gifts in a second. Foundation grants, we, as Evan mentioned a minute ago, we don't include family foundations in that line item. We actually consider a family foundation part of our major gifts program. Really, anybody that we count as a foundation is someone who has a true application process, typically a board who decides, that sort of thing. If it's lunch and we get a gift, we usually just call that a major gift. Okay, back to here. Okay. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the art and the science of all of this, but it really comes down to this. You don't get if you don't ask. And that's really, at the end of the day, the most important part of this. It can feel very nerve-wracking. You can do a lot of planning, but sometimes you can over-plan and never get to the ask. And sometimes you just have to go out and do it. So great, thank you. So this process that we do here is similar to any nonprofit where I've worked or any other nonprofit out in the world. What we're asking for is a little different, and in many cases it's newer to funders because our work as a nonpartisan nonprofit newsroom is still a newer form of philanthropy. But at the end of the day, the process is still relatively the same. And this applies for us for both major gifts and for our foundation work. And I think that's been our success in the foundation world, is we treat the foundations just as we would an individual major donor. We cultivate the foundations, we talk with them, we ask them what they're interested in, just like we would with an individual major donor. And because of that, we've had a higher success rate with those grants than we'd have otherwise. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. With individual major donors, many of them, as I mentioned, are really new to this form of giving. They may have given to PBS or NPR, something like that, but our form of giving is relatively new to them. And so for both foundations and for individuals, most of them have no track record of supporting media or journalism. These are things that aren't even in their gift histories or anything like that. And so it can be a little daunting to work on that prospect list and think, who are we going to go to if there's no track record for this type of philanthropy? And so what we do is we think a lot about, we do a lot of prospecting, and a lot of time crunching data around looking at who supports other types of media, who supports other types of journalism. Then we also data mine things like political donor lists. That was a huge game changer early on in the trib when we started looking at those political donor lists. And then we also look at things like now that we have more of a track record, we look at the qualities of our major donors and what else do they support out in the community. And again, draw conclusions that if this funder who also supports the arts and the environment, and I'm looking at other art institutions and environmental organizations, I think they probably might be interested in what we're doing, because there's a track record of other donors being interested in all of these things. And that's actually proven to be true when we start data mining and seeking prospects out in the universe. So we do a lot of time just identifying donors. We keep lots of lists. In fact, too many lists. This is, list paralysis can set in quickly. And then the art side comes in a little bit as you start thinking about who is the best person at our organization to cultivate these relationships. And for us, of course, as you've heard mentioned, Evan is our secret weapon in so much of this. And it is really important at your organizations to have that person, whether it's your CEO or managing editor or whoever it is at your organization, who can be passionate and articulate and speak well on behalf of your organization. But over time, it's also really important that your donors have multiple relationships with your organization as much as possible, because you want them to feel attached to your organization, not to just one individual, and that's that balance that you really have to work on, but you have to think about for the future, because as you can see by this circle, it never ends, and I think that's sometimes the daunting part about fundraising is once you get that gift, it all just starts over again. Even with that donor, you have to just go back right into stewarding them well, cultivating them again for the next gift. And so as much as possible, you do want a robust relationship between the donor and the organization. For us, that can be something like making sure that they come to our events and interact with our events and our team that's working on that, making sure that they subscribe to our newsletters. Many of them now are super familiar when they actually meet a reporter, which is pretty rare, but they'll say, oh my gosh, I've been reading their newsletter for 3 years. I'm so glad to finally meet them. And so they start developing more of a relationship with the full organization and not just with one individual. So that's a big part of our strategy, is thinking through who's going to cultivate this gift, who's going to work on cultivating the donor, what are we going to talk with them, what is their history of giving, what are they interested in. So as I mentioned, most of the foundations and individuals that support us don't have a history of supporting journalism, or it's a newer history in the last couple of years, but for sure 5 years ago they did not have that. And so we don't give up, just because their mission statement and their guidelines for a foundation on their website, or if we look at an individual's donor history, it has no indication of supporting journalism, we don't take that as, okay, let's scratch them off the list. What we do is dig deeper and look at what they do give to. Is it education? Is it the environment? Is it issues around mental health? And and then we go further, and start thinking, okay, how do we know them? Is this a 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation? How can we get in front of them in the best possible way? And we've really been fortunate to go to individuals and foundations and say, you're passionate about education. We've seen it through your track record, and we're doing this amazing reporting and data sets and everything else around education. By funding us, you're furthering your mission by raising awareness for your issue out with elected officials and in the public sector. And they get it. There are a few that I'm still working on who don't naturally get it, but for the most part, people have come to recognize that this really is a strategy that they understand and believe in, that raising awareness of the issues is part of their it aligns with their goals. And so we now have foundations who are supporting us that you would not necessarily automatically imagine. For instance, the Texas Women's Foundation, which is a very traditional direct service provider. And I thought that I would have to really do a big song and dance to explain to them why they should be funding our work. And they just said, let us stop you right here. We're in. And they said, I was like, really? And they said, no, we are not going to stop our main mission of direct service providing, but we also realize that we're just sort of plugging the hole in the dam, and then the cracks keep spreading every year on the issues that we care about. And if we don't start working on systems change, and raise awareness of these issues, then that's all we're continuing to do every year. It's just this, sort of hamster wheel. And so they realize that through public service journalism that we're providing, it's raising awareness for the causes that they care about. As Evan mentioned, and I talked about a little bit earlier, the donor relationship that we have is somewhat of a one-way street. And that they're giving us funding for our content, but they are not telling us what to report on. They're not advising us on what to do. And people have been really respectful of that. I have some foundations who have taken our spiel about that so seriously that they constantly say to me, now tell me if I'm ever crossing the line and asking you a question. They really do take this seriously, and they understand that there is this wall where they can be funding our education coverage writ large, but we're not suddenly going to start, doing a deep dive report on charter schools because that's what this one foundation really cares about. That's just not going to happen. So what I say is just, look at the totality of our work. I can often give just a general especially before a legislative session. We know we'll be covering, school finance, things like that. But other than that, it really is this sort of one-way street. But what we've realized too about that one-way street is when I first got here, we took that so seriously that I never knew what we were doing next as an organization, because we were keeping that church and state so true to form. But what we've realized is that we're missing opportunities, that if I don't know, the grant cycle can be a year in the making. And if I don't know what the newsroom wants to do, whether it's hiring a new reporter, creating a new beat, creating a new database, I can't pitch it to foundations or to individuals, both of whom often like to be, one of the first dollars in. They like to help make things happen. And so what we've recognized in the last few years is that I can be aware of what's coming up in the newsroom without violating that integrity. And instead, what it's turned into is tons of opportunity, so that I often meet with Emily, our editor-in-chief. I know what's going on. We all do a management team together every 2 weeks so that we can share and talk about things. And what we've realized is that you can still maintain that integrity, but also know what's going on in the organization. And now I'm able to, pitch a new reporting beat or a new concept to foundations very far in advance to give us enough time to make that actually happen. And conversely, I think now that especially at the highest levels of the editorial team, there's a recognition of that they can know a little bit about where their funding comes from, or at least that there is funding for their work, and so that we don't make some of the mistakes that we made early on, where the right hand and left hand didn't know what each other was doing. At one point, we canceled some newsletters that we did, editorial didn't realize had been funded by grants, you know. And so that rookie mistake I share with you because I don't want it to happen to you all, and I don't think it'll ever happen to us again because we've become so much better at sharing and talking through the plans for each department. We just spent, 3 hours last week where everyone shared their goals for 2020 from the audience team, the events team, editorial, revenue, you know, all the way across the board, and so that we know and can coordinate better on what we're trying to do. And we're so much more effective now because we communicate so much better. And so the fun part about that for the donors, as Evan talked about, they are, you know, this is that challenge. You want to keep them giving. You want to keep them engaged and excited about what's going on, what's new, all of those different things. And so sometimes it even just affords me the opportunity to talk about regular, old, boring ops, which I know for many people is the hardest money to raise, in a way that just feels new and feels compelling just when I know the goals that the editorial team has for the next year, whether it's deepening the engagement with our audience, providing more solutions journalism, or perhaps doing more explanatory journalism. You know, just being able to articulate that to donors, even if it's just this, you know, the same old ops request, keeps it all fresh and engaging. Let's see what's next. All right, so I didn't get a chance to really expand this slide, but our major gifts donors, with only one exception, all live in Texas. And so that kind of gives you an idea of the spiel and what compels them to give. And for those Texas donors, it really is about, at the end of the day, some of them care about education, some of them care about healthcare, but all of them, really what resonates with them is they care about the future of our state, and they, the sort of secondary underpinning is that they love the idea of us giving away our content for free, whether it's on our site or through our distribution partners. There's something about that that equal access that appeals to every single donor that we have, and they feel very passionate about. And so that's something that's sort of common to all of our major individuals who support us. And it's somewhat the same for the foundations, but it's usually going a little bit deeper because the foundations have such, you know, specific goals and strategies that they're trying to fulfill. So as you can see, our foundation support is more spread out across the U.S. It's still clustered a lot in Texas, in Texas-based foundations, who we go to very much in the same way I just described with individual donors. But we do have some national foundations who support us as well. And the pitch there is often that, again, some of them are really passionate about one or two subject matters, and so, again, it's the conversation about you care deeply about education. We're providing this top-notch public service journalism on education. Come join us in this work. And then for some, it's also they feel strongly about journalism writ large, and they want to be a part of supporting us as a part of the whole ecosystem. And then for many right now, I'm working with them that are concerned about news deserts and worried about, again, going back to that equal access to information and the fact that we're, providing this content so someone living in rural Texas has the same access to information that someone here in Austin has, that we're taking our events on the road and bringing these conversations to areas that wouldn't have access to it otherwise, is something that really resonates. And then for us, being in Texas, Texas is sort of exceptional both in great things and in not so great things, and it is a bellwether, and so a lot of the national foundations support us because Texas does tend to reflect or act out what's happening nationally, and so that's the sort of scope of the foundation work, the big difference with the foundation work and the individual donor work is all of the reporting that needs to go into the foundation work. And I think the biggest question that I hear when I meet with fundraisers out in the nonprofit journalism world is how do we quantify and measure impact? It's the number one thing that I think everybody struggles with, and we struggle with it too still, and it's something that is hard. It's especially hard. I was just filling out a grant from a very traditional healthcare foundation who their metrics document I just can't use. There's just, it is created for a health provider. And so the great part is that I called them up, and rather than continuing to struggle with it, I just called them up and said, I'm struggling with this. And they said, you know what, you just tell us the metrics that you all use and, that sort of thing. And so that's where, again, it's really important to have a strong relationship with those foundations to be able to discuss these things through rather than just continuing to struggle and spend time on it. But measuring impact is something that we work on every day. We've developed lots of strategies around the sort of, traditional indicators, whether it's page views and audience and location and all those different things. And then we've tried somewhat successfully to work on getting feedback from the newsroom. That's probably the hardest thing that I've had in the last few years, because we do have that separation, is finding out, whether it's someone who's writing directly to a reporter and saying, this article opened my eyes or changed my life, or you captured exactly my worries. That wasn't always filtering to me. And so we've come up with some ways with just having a catch-all email address that a reporter can just mindlessly forward any kind of feedback like that straight to that email address, and it goes to me. But they don't have to think, oh, do I send it to Terry, or do I send it to Jenny, or anything like that. It's just making it as easy as possible, and I try to track all of that. And then I try now to track any legislative change or something else that happens, and I just keep a huge file of that going at all times so that I can tell those stories from an individual all the way through to sort of systems change. Now, that's not always going to happen, and so that's part of the challenge, is that really first and foremost I tell people we're just increasing awareness of the issues, and we can demonstrate that through audience growth, through some of the surveys that we do, things like that. But it's still an ongoing challenge to demonstrate impact. But we're getting there. We're, I think, getting stronger every year in our ability to do that work and to be more mindful of capturing feedback when we receive it. The hardest part is going back and trying to find that feedback months later if you don't have a place to keep it, and to stay organized. I calculated this summer that I spend 3 months out of the year writing grant reports. It's a huge time sink, and that brings me to the next point, which is the grant work is very time consuming, and so you have to be prepared for that. And part of that is we don't submit any cold grant applications. We have done it occasionally, and guess how many we get? 0. So I really only work on submitting a grant application after we have really established a relationship with the foundation and have some sort of green light. Now that they're not saying like you've got the money, but they've given us the green light to apply. We feel like we've done our best in understanding their goals and showing them how their goals and ours align. And so I rarely, if never, just submit a grant without having any interaction with the foundation, which means that I often ignore what's on their websites where it says, don't reach out to us, don't do this, don't do that. I usually try to find some degree of connection, whether it's with someone else they've supported or with a board member or some sort of way to get that introduction, and so that we can work on cultivating that grant. And so that, when I say that we treat the foundations just like we would an individual, that's really what I mean. And that the great part about that is that we've now developed these relationships that we know them well. They're letting us know when they're getting ready to go into a strategic planning process and what's coming up, and it's a much more fruitful over time relationship than just give us the money relationships that we have. I forgot to say one thing, which is how large our team is for fundraising. So until about a year ago, it was just me and working with Evan. But we've expanded in recent months, and we now have a major gifts officer who is managing the major gifts prospecting and cultivation, as well as the Circle membership program. And then we've just added a grants manager to the team who is helping me tackle that grant reporting work so that I can get out the door and do more fundraising. When, at the beginning you saw that pie chart, and while we're really thrilled with that diversity in our funding streams, what I also know is that a best practice out in the fundraising world in the larger, just general way, is that individual major gifts is where most seasoned nonprofits spend most of their time and where they have most of their income coming in. And they do that because corporations and foundations can suddenly change their mission, their strategy, whereas individuals over time are just a stronger bet. You might, sort of wax and wane in your interests or in your income levels, but you're not going to stop being you. And whereas if you have a staff change at a foundation or a staff change at a corporation, you're often starting over again. And so sometimes that income can be less reliable. Many boards of nonprofit organizations always want to go that way for foundation and corporate money because I think it feels a little less scary than the individual route. But really, over time, the individual major philanthropy has been proven to be the most effective way for sustainability. And so it's something that I'm hoping we'll pursue more of as we go. There's a limited number of foundations, but there's almost a limitless number of individuals in Texas, especially to approach. And so that's something that we'll be focusing more and more time on in the future. Rodney, speaking of time, am I? Yeah.
How do you, with donors and foundations, is that money going to particular things, or does it go into one big bucket, or how do you kind of promise we're going to do this kind of coverage?
Yeah, so we almost have zero restricted grants or restricted gifts. I try to raise ops money. And so that even if it's funding our education coverage, that's just the ops portion of that budget. And so now and then I'll have something that's a little bit more designated. So for instance, we went to a foundation 2 years ago to say we really want to do some upgrades to our schools Explorer that we have on our site, this very useful data set that we have. And so they funded that work. And so that was a little bit more designated or restricted than our normal. But I try to get, first and foremost, unrestricted ops revenue, period, end of story.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering that if someone suggests you, like, let's say, I know what you do and I like what you do, and I want to give money, but you don't put my name on the list. What would you answer?
We couldn't take the gift.
Okay.
So we don't accept any anonymous gifts. So far, it's never caused us to lose a donor. But we are very upfront about that. It'll be on our donor wall, and people, once we explain to them the reason why, they accept it and they get it.
Can I follow up on that anonymity issue? Have you had any people give through unnamed donor advised funds, like the ABC fund, or?
No. Again, we would probably say that we have to specify where it's coming from. Yeah.
Hi there. So you mentioned that just now that the only time you refuse gifts is if somebody won't say who they are, et cetera. But are there any foundations or individuals who you won't take money from? Somebody who maybe comes to you and says, we'd like to contribute, but you say you're outside of our values? And then I had a technical question on the sales.
Yeah, no, that has not happened to me while I'm here. I don't know if we've. I think that has happened more on the sponsor side, and it's been more of just maybe thinking, is this a target for us? No, rather than it getting anywhere and then turning it down. So no, Evan is always sort of quick to say that, it's the old Woody Allen joke of, taking a metaphysics class and being accused of cheating by looking into the soul of the person next to them, and that we're not in the business of looking into the soul of our donors. But we do have. What was the second part?
Well, the other thing was a technical question. How, with your donor wall that automatically posts the donations, how big of a technical lift is that to pull from Salesforce and update that? Is that relatively simple? And do you guys open source that connector by any chance?
I think it is open sourced. Yeah. So that's part that I blissfully don't know.
It was a bit of a lift, but we actually co-developed this process with the Revenue Hub. Yeah, and so it's the same system they use. And before the Revenue Hub was the Revenue Hub, when it's still Voice of San Diego, we worked with them and MemPost to develop that. And I think theirs is different a bit than ours now. They've branched, but it's basically the same thing.
Up front, all right, coming.
Where'd I'll share with you.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the political donor lists and how that revelation came about, and to what degree you're still relying on that as a prospect?
Yeah, we still look at it almost every day, and the revelation came in early on when Evan was just developing the Major Gifts program, and was doing just a lot of fact-finding and checking and talking to other folks and talking to other fundraisers. And someone who was a political fundraiser said, you know what, you should really be looking at these lists. There are people who are giving to all sorts of different candidates, both local and national, who we think would be a great source for you. And so it really has turned out that we look at, we don't look at the hyper-local lists, because for us it's more about statewide, but we look at statewide donor lists. We look at our own data that we have on our site, or we look at other disclosure sites, to find those names, and then we start doing some research on who they are, what else do they support, and sometimes it's. I said that we don't submit any cold grants. We sometimes, Evan likes to submit a cold request. And sometimes he's successful with it, sometimes not. But he will now and then reach out to someone and say, I see that you are giving, to this cause. I'd love to talk to you about what we're doing at the Tribune. I think that you'd be interested. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think the other thing I would just say is that we never take no for an answer, and I think that's something that you have to learn about, unless it's a hell no and I'm getting a restraining order. Especially when you're first applying for a grant, sometimes it just doesn't work out that you're encouraged to give, all those sorts of things, but at the end of the day, they perhaps had less to give away that year, or so another board member had a pet project. And so many organizations make the mistake of not applying again. And so don't give up on the first time. And it's the same with our individual donors. We have some that we, asked and asked and asked and asked, and finally just found the right timing with the right approach.
There's obviously self-interest involved with donors. So purely hypothetically, if you had 6 renewable energy, solar, wind developers, kind of come to you and say, we'll each do 50 grand a year or 20 grand a year over 5 years. But we want you to do, and there's no condition. It's not conditioned, but there's a wink and a nod. Mm-mm. So
yeah, that's just not going to happen.
Or would you we'll endow the Joe Smith Energy Reporting Chair.
Yeah.
Would you do that?
We have discussed endowments, but we haven't developed a policy yet there. That's something I didn't talk about, which is having a gift acceptance policy and other policies. We're still, we are in the middle of a capital campaign right now, but it again is really just an ops campaign. We're not ready yet to talk about endowed funds. But I do anticipate that that'll come up. And that's probably where we'll have to get more into coming up with those, back to the other question, sort of some parameters around types of donors and things like that.
Hi, can you talk to us about the decision to move membership over to audience development and away from development, traditional development, and sort of what are some of the pros and cons that you've seen with that, and what do you still play any role in how membership is run, and because it's very much like sort of an annual fund, so I'm just curious about that.
So that's a perfect question, because that was my last slide that I didn't get to. And I'll let Sarah talk more this afternoon about the pros and cons and everything. There it is. So that's thank you for asking that, because what I wanted to say is I talked earlier about breaking down the silos and working more with teams. Well, that also applies just to the fundraising itself. And so we often, membership and the sponsorships team and development will work together to tackle these problems rather than working individually. And a great example is in crowdfunding. So that Sarah, who is our membership lead, will work, in this case, on a larger appeal out in the world for sort of smaller gifts to support a project. But we, the development team, came up with a matching grant from a family foundation. And then we also, through the sponsorships team, got some in-kind support for this project. And so we often tackle these problems together. And again, that whole idea that we're much stronger together than we are divided. And so we'll tackle things. We work on donor stewardship together. So for instance, Sarah sends out a monthly newsletter to our donors. Our members, it also goes to our donors. But we also have conversations all the time about, do the major donors, are they going to get something that the members get? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But we just keep that dialogue going. We're not so big that we can't, just say to each other, hey, do you want them to get this or no? And we also have built in some protocols into Salesforce and into MailChimp that sort of, it's the if-then kind of thing. If it's this kind of message that's going out, here are the people it goes to and here are the people it doesn't go to. But there's always exceptions to that, but sometimes we're much stronger. For instance, announcing an award, we want that to go to everybody, but even though it may just be the membership team that's taking care of that, they're taking care of it for everybody. The other thing I just wanted to mention real fast is about where you can find prospects. And does April talk in her thing about the Speakers Bureau? Okay, so one thing that is a revenue stream for us is that our CEO and our editor-in-chief back there and our our executive editor speak in public often, and there's a fee associated with that comes back to the organization. So that's great for revenue, right? But what we do is we think about it and take it a step further. It's also become a great place to meet new potential funders. So I will often tag along, and I have met people in the room who've come up to me afterwards to say, we should be giving you money, or I'd love to talk to you further. And so it's always thinking sort of strategically about what are these other opportunities that can come up. How can we take something further? How can we, and so now I think that rather than, rolling their eyes that they have to go do another speech somewhere, they realize that it is an opportunity for us in both an immediate way and a longer term way of building relationships.